Welcome to the Tri-City Herald Edit Board with Representative Mark Klicker and Challenger Jeff Strickler. They're with the 16th District. And I'm Cicely Rexis. I'm the editorial page editor with the Tri-City Herald. And joining me today, we have Ken Robertson. He is the retired executive editor from the Tri-City Herald, and Mike Paoli, who is our community rep on the Herald. So we're going to start with Representative Klicker. We'll give him 2 minutes to give his opening statement, and then we'll allow Jeff to have his turn. So whenever you're ready, Representative Klicker, just let me know and I'll start the timer.
Thank you, Cecilia and Ken and Mike. I'm Mark Klicker. I live in Walla Walla, from the Walla Walla Valley area. We're farmers and ranchers in the area. My family has been in the 16th Legislative District since 1861. So we've been there forever, many generations. At the same time, part of that includes I farmed across from Franklin County. I have a family that lives in Franklin County and farm in Franklin County, as well as Benton County. Friends, neighbors. We did lots of strawberry sales and Christmas tree sales in the 16th District, and it's been part of my grandparents lived in Pasco, so it is home. 16th District, lived there all my life. I've never lived in Seattle or Portland or outside of the area, so I understand it and I know it. What I ran into, as I was elected 2 years ago, I ran into an interesting virtual session, the last 2 sessions in 21 and 22. And the sad thing is there were no relationships that were built because of being virtual. But what was put upon us were new taxes because of the Climate Commitment Act. So we're going to start seeing taxes go skyrocket at the gas pump beginning in January of 2023. There were radical laws in 2021, and a lot of those laws had to do with crime. And so there were bills that were so radical, they haven't created a balance. And so now they wouldn't even vote for a pursuit bill that we really needed. So we're seeing crime, mental health issues that are really, really hurting our district and the state as well. There's huge legislation and a big push to eliminate all natural gas. And that started with House Bill 1084. That was to eliminate all natural gas in all of the state of Washington. Is that it?
You hit your time, but we'll talk about that later. We'll get to that topic. So, okay. Mr. Strickler, and again, if you go over a little bit, I'll just wave my hand so we can wrap up. So whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this forum today. My name is Jeff Strickler, and I want to start by telling you about the last month. I have walked essentially every neighborhood in Benton City, in Prosser, across Kennewick. We're working hard across Walla Walla. Myself, personally, as well as a small team of volunteers, have now knocked on close to 9,000 doors. And the reason we did that is simple. We wanted to understand, what does the 16th look like after redistricting? Who are the people of the 16th? And we wanted to listen to the issues that are important to them. And your message has been very, very clear. First and foremost, it's about jobs. Many of you have shared that, sure, there's plenty of jobs, there's plenty of openings, but what do they pay? And if that pay isn't sufficient for rent or to buy a home, then how can you put down roots here? It's really that simple. People have also shared their stories, say, for example, about childcare. And the state did really, they took a step forward with the Fair Start Act, but we've got to take it to the next level. And, as a result, if you don't have childcare, how can you take that dream job that might enable you to buy that home? Many people have also shared their struggles with healthcare. The reality is that people are having to go to places. This morning, I talked to the Walla Walla Disability Network, and one of the people there was talking about having to go off to Seattle or to Spokane for the most basic services because they're not available here within our area. These are the issues that people have said time and time again are important to them, and it's fundamentally the reasons that I'm running. I think we need to do more to support local job growth and good paying, the creation of good paying jobs in conjunction with the Port of Benton County, for example, and the Port of Walla Walla, in order to create a greater opportunity throughout our region. I'm also concerned about our energy policy and its overall impact to our environment. I think there's plenty of room for compromise and room for opportunity here. Given the worldwide shift away from petroleum, we're blessed with hydro, with wind and solar. Let's view these as opportunities for our region rather than detriments.
Thank you. I guess I should say that Representative Klicker, you are a Republican, and Mr. Strickler, you are running as a Democrat. So I
Correct.
forgot to mention that right off the bat. So some of our viewers will probably want to know that. So I'm just going to start with you, Representative Klicker. On your website, you said we don't have a taxing problem. I think you said we have a spending problem, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, and then I'd like Mr. Strickler to kind of give us his take on the state's tax system. Okay, so go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should revise that, because we do have a taxing problem because we're spending too much.
Mm-hmm.
And a perfect example is when they enacted the law for the Climate Commitment Act. These laws now are going to raise per gallon of gas 50 cents to $1 a gallon, and that's what people are going to have to pay. Be right, and so we're going to be up there, if not higher than California, just about where we're at with California. But at the same time, we have such a surplus, and they've gone ahead and they're spending that surplus, which is good. We've got to stop the spending, slow it down, or at least spend it in good, constructive ways. And we're finding that, for instance, even on the transportation bill, that was not, it's a bill that was not bonded this year, so it gave them the chance to vote on it because there was plenty of money in there. Everything went to the Climate Commitment Act, Move Ahead Washington, and it went into electric ferries, $200 million per ferry, something that could have gone to some of the infrastructure in rural Washington, and no projects were awarded in that because of it. But the spending is going in a lot of different directions before we can finish up the things that we need to take care of first. And so that's where some of our problem is.
Okay, great. All right, Mr. Strickler, what's your take on where the money's being spent?
Well, first I'd comment that there was a Supreme Court justice a number of years ago who made the comment that with taxes, I buy civilization. There's going to be basic services that we all agree need to be funded in our state. And the question really then becomes, how do we most appropriately fund in a way that is not wasteful and that is fiscally responsible? And I think there is an interesting question raised when we think back in time when I was a child and the lottery tax was supposed to fully fund education, or the marijuana tax was supposed to reduce our overall tax burden across services. And now certainly we're having a conversation in our courts about a capital gains tax. Taxes need to be easy for the public to understand. They need to be clear in the purpose of the tax. And frankly, it needs to be transparent how that money is being used. I think so often about, like, I'm a realtor, and so I think in terms of a home, right? If you have a windfall, you don't go buy a boat or RV, you go put it into the roof and the HVAC and the things that mattered before the house falls down, right? So there's certainly a conversation to be had about the overall structure of our taxing system and whether it's fair and equitable, particularly to Eastern Washingtonians. I'm very concerned about the property tax burden, particularly of our seniors and our farmers. Okay. So from there, at the same time, to sort of waffle about, well, too much tax, or this is costly, or that, let's have a real brass tax conversation around how the money is spent. And here in Eastern Washington, where are we underserved? We've got a lot of vulnerable communities that I'd like to talk about throughout this conversation that I'm concerned about really need some more dollars. So it's as much about the structure of the overall tax system and then how we allocate it.
Okay, great. Did you want to? Oh, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yes, for Representative Klicker. I believe your opponent just suggested that you waffle about. And I want to challenge you to perhaps provide some of the specifics with regard to too much spending.
I certainly did not mean to be insulting. If
No,
that was
and
the
I don't
way
want
it
to
was
imply
interpreted.
that you were, but it was an implication that there's a lack of specifics coming from your opponent, and so I'd like to give Mr. Klicker a chance.
Well, I can give a good example. I don't know what I'm waffling about. I didn't give specifics because we have a whole lot to talk about. But if you want to look at some of the specifics, we can take transportation, for instance, or the Climate Commitment Act and the taxes are going into that. All of that spending is going into infrastructure, electric grid, and that for a green energy grid, without going into infrastructure throughout Eastern Washington, Southwest Washington, Northeast, and North Central Washington. None of it. Not $1 is going to go to that, other than the exception of a few little projects. And these are electrification. Perfect example is the ferry. The 4 electric ferries, $800 million that are going, that they're not even proven yet, but that money is going to those. They haven't even been built, but that money is allocated to them instead of being allocated to phase 8 of Highway 12. Nothing came to us when it came to that. We didn't vote on, not one Republican voted on these, the infrastructure bills and the transportation bill. And we did not vote on any of the taxes that through the Climate Commitment Act because of there's so much frivolous spending in some of those projects.
You made a comment that electric ferries was technology that hadn't been proven yet. Are you speaking specifically here in the U.S.? And I don't want to set you up for this. Here in the Tri-Cities, we just had a joint commission head over to Scandinavia where they do use electric ferries very successfully in the Norway region. So I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely. They're still working with the manufacturing company to work out a deal if they're going to be able to make them or not, or they're going to have to go out and contract with somebody else. There's issues in spending that is going to that how long will those ferries last? You know, they're doing projects in Norway, but what we have completely good functioning ferries, and the money right now with the traffic and the accidents that we're having to fish up other infrastructure jobs, the money is not going to infrastructure projects finished that we've been working on for 30 years. This Highway 12 project, the concept was clear back in the 1970s, and they still have. We had Representative Fye, the chairman of the Transportation Committee for the House of Representatives, came down, looked at the project, but when there was the opportunity to spend the money on some electrification, that number one, there's not even enough power generated because we don't have enough for hydroelectric, we don't have enough for anything because they're reducing our coal plants and the fossil fuels. And they're going to green energy. We don't have enough infrastructure to even charge some of those things. So they're putting the cart before the horse, try to finish other things up first and prioritize correctly.
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything, Mr. Strickler?
I'd just like to comment. I'd like to make 3 comments if I could. One, I would note that I rode those ferries for 10 years when I lived in Paulsbo. And if you've ridden those ferries, one of the things you'll know is it's the largest ferry system in the world, at least last I checked. If not, I mean, it's at least in the top 3. I mean, that's just the reality of the geography of our state. We're in a very unique position in terms of needing to provide water transit for our populace. And those ferries, those diesel ones, regularly break down and affect the lives of thousands of travelers every single day. I'm certainly not gonna. I think this apples to oranges comparison is unfair. It doesn't negate the fact that we also need money for Highway 12. And again, I'm going to note, I just simply don't understand this. We were at a time of budget surpluses. Mark was on the Transportation Committee, and the dollars didn't flow to Highway 12. I understand his statements about the chairman came over and so forth, but fundamentally this is one of the reasons I'm running. This is a deficit in our advocacy on the part of Eastern Washington. And then the final statement I would make is simply that, I heard a presentation from Scott Peters, the CEO of Columbia REA last week, and I think Scott made a really valid point. And I think in some ways Mark is on base here as well. The reality is that the state drew a line in the sand when it came to a number of energy related issues, and we're probably ahead of themselves. And we do need to listen to experts like Scott and those working in the energy industry to figure out how do we get from here to our goals. But rather than view this sort of through a pessimistic lens, I would much rather review it opportunistically. Let's realize that we have something that not only Western Washington wants, but the rest of the country wants. And we're one of the most carbon neutral states in the whole country. We're a model for the rest of the nation when it comes to energy. So let's take advantage of that position of leadership rather than viewing it as something to go backwards on.
So Jeff, you mentioned something about a deficit that we have in Eastern Washington. I just wanted to clarify, are you inferring that as a Democrat, you might have more pull with the legislature right now because Democrats are in the majority? Is that what you meant? That a Democratic voice from our area?
So let me clarify several points. One would be that I think that our system as a nation works better when we have a plurality of political perspectives. And I think it's important that we work across not only party lines, but geographic lines, right? And understanding that there's different sides to our state. We're different. We need to try to work together to understand one another. But the political reality, if we're talking about sort of the inside baseball approach here, is that sending a Democrat will send a strong message to Olympia. It will be sort of an Eastern Washington is open for business kind of a moment. But frankly, I'm also speaking to Mr. Klicker's record. The energy bill that he put forward. And again, I don't want to make this partisan. I like Mark. I'd love to sit down and have a beer with him. I think he's a solid community leader. But when I look at his record, there's a reason that I'm running here. And I think his energy bill harmed property rights, or could have had the potential to harm property rights. And yes, I'm concerned that he was in a position of leadership in our transit committee and in the legislature, and we didn't get the funding here in Eastern Washington. We were left out in the cold in a sense. And when I look at all of the various kinds of programs that we need here within our region, the list goes on and on and on. And I would say that many of these needs that we had have been built up long before Mark went to the legislature, right? So it's not like I'm going to point fingers at any one individual. We've had a track record here going back a number of years where there's programs that we've just been left out in the cold on, and I want to change that.
Mark, I'm sure you want to respond to some of those comments.
Thank you. And Mr. Strickler apparently doesn't quite understand what that bill is about, because if you read the bill, there's HB 1871. What the bill does is it put a short-term moratorium on any new green energy sites until a legislative task force was formed, worked with the Department of Commerce, and they could develop a blueprint, say a 30-year blueprint. I can't remember how many years it was, but develop a blueprint of where they believe green energy sightings should go throughout the state of Washington. There's more to just, when it comes to the property rights, it's property rights of others. When you put these green energy siting projects in, number one, it ruins viewshed. So when you're looking at the 240 some wind turbines that are going to go in right behind the hill in the Tri-Cities, you're going to be looking at those over there by Badger Canyon. Consumes over 60,000 acres. It does. It benefits a couple farmers in there. And I want to see that. I wanted wind turbines on my own farm. But at the same time, it ruins it and lowers property values. And frankly, people don't want to see it. And you can talk to people throughout the Tri-City area that do not want those wind turbines. Now, I'm not saying I want them or I don't want them. My goal is to develop a blueprint for all of Washington. At the same time, when you have eminent domain that could occur for putting in the transmission of that electricity that would go to Seattle to charge those electric ferries, that could become eminent domain, and people are forced to get rid of their property so people come in and maintain those power poles. And then finally, in that bill, when I did 1871, it had language that would compensate those communities that are providing it, instead of just giving it, sending it to Seattle or Portland or wherever it may be, but it provides funding for the communities that are providing majority of that energy in the state of Washington. So it's about 2 to 3-fold. It didn't have anything to do with property rights. It has to do with siting. And I want to make sure that is corrected. And then because that it was cut off strategically cut off during the cutoff in committee, we were able to take the language out of my bill, and it went into the governor's bill, his EFSEC bill. That's Energy Facility Siting Evaluation Council Commission. And that bill, what he did is, it was a bad bill, because what it does is it gives all the power to the commission, because it becomes its own department, and they make the decisions even over growth management rules, overrides growth management. We took my language, sections 19, 20, 21, and 22, took out the moratorium and brought it back to where it would allow community and local government involvement. It also included the compensation portion of it. So it was a phenomenal bill. It was voted with flying colors in both the House and the Senate. It went to the governor's desk. He signed it with these chairs, and he signed the bill after vetoing all of our language, and they laughed about it on TVW. Now that is cooperation, and that was what was so upsetting, because that wasn't working with us. They played us, and that is upsetting. So I wanted to get it right. It wasn't about property rights. It's about doing the right thing for everybody.
Mark, what about the Highway 12 issue? I understand. I'm just trying to revisit what Mr. Strickler said, that you were on the transit committee.
Yeah, I'm on transportation, and that was the same exact situation. They and so much of it's because we were going virtual, we couldn't do it, but the focus is to get into the green energy. That was the push. They're wanting to get rid of natural gas, a lot of these different things. So it goes into the electrification projects all along the Puget Sound. Nothing in the district I live in, that you live in, or the districts, including the Spokane area, where you have 3 Democrat leaders apparently were pushing the same thing. Highway 12 Phase 8 could have been easily passed and approved. Because there's no bonding this last session, there was no bonding, there was plenty of money, the Democrats didn't have to have the Republican votes. So they went ahead, they developed their plan. They did not include us, our ranking member, Andrew Barkas, to the table. And after they made their plan, they put it together, they presented it to us 2 hours before they put it forth in front of the media. Again, that's not really good cooperation. That is not working together. We hope next go around, that we'll be able to change that. That will work together. That's what was so neat about Representative Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House, Frank Chop, because his ideology was completely different than a lot of the people in the Republicans, and he mostly voted very, very liberal, but he allowed discussion, he allowed cooperation, and he allowed balance, and it worked. But we're not getting that with the current leadership. Hopefully that will change going into the next cycle.
Go ahead, Mike.
Representative, you seem to be making your opponent's point that Republicans from the east side are being left out in the cold. Could you, and you mentioned you hope that will change, but do you have any tangible strategic approations to make that change?
I think a lot of that change is going to be when we get to meet in person. There were no relationships being built at that time. A lot of that issue has to do with our governor, and it's really unfortunate that he pushed through some things, allowed wanted a lot of things to not work with us. But hopefully, being in person, it's amazing what happened the last 2 weeks. when we were in person, it is amazing what got accomplished. Unfortunately, it came up to sine die, and we finished up there. But the final 2 weeks, it was great. We worked together. Yeah, there was some really contentious bills. One that we were up all night long, and but that's what it's about. You have to remember that a majority of the bills that we vote on are bipartisan. I mean, probably 80% of the bills or more are by just a very few bills that are really important to different sectors of the state. Are the ones that were very contentious, and there was no balance at all. And that's what was so different in years past. This was an unprecedented, and I've heard that quite often by our own leaders. This was an unprecedented last 2 years that things were ramrodded through. So I think it'll change, and I look forward to it being in person.
Okay, Ken, you had a question?
Yeah, I've been watching the legislature for four plus decades now. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen a governor treated with more vitriol than has happened in the last few years. And I always felt like Walla Walla had a way to sort of leaven that. I mean, we had a representative who sponsored bills to break the state in half. And that's not the kind of thing that's going to create collaboration. And do you think that it's easy to criticize someone behind their backs? It's a little harder to do it in face to face. And what I hear you saying, Mark, is we need more of that. But I look at the Walla Walla highway thing and I say, why aren't they getting the money? Well, for one thing, when you're smacking the governor around every day, day in and day out as a party, and you never have anything good to say about him, and he can look to pull out a quote from a previous Democrat, I think it was Governor Leary, I can see all the votes I need from the top of the Space Needle. That just kills us on this side of the state. Why in the world can't our Republicans begin to realize that this is the real world? We're going to have to live with it. Let's build some friendships and relationships instead of just create nothing but problems. And admittedly, Inslee is not necessarily the world's easiest person to get along with, but it sort of seems to me like somebody on the east side needs to take the initiative. And don't you think the Republican Party needs to look at that? For heaven's sake, Jeanette Hayner ran the state Senate while being a minority. The Republican Party was in a minority, and she had 2 Democrats who voted with her, and she ran the state Senate and ran the state budget. And, that's real statesmanship. And I'd love to hear both of you say, this is how I'm going to try to do this, because it clearly isn't working right now.
I think we'll let Mr. Strickler take that first, so he gets a turn.
That's fine.
Early on in my career, I had a manager who said to me, if you're pointing one finger, there's 3 pointing back right at you. And so to my thinking, when we go to get into these negotiations and these compromises, you're right, Ken, we've got to be cognizant of what's my role in all of this. Am I exacerbating the animosity, or am I in some way leveling it out? Frankly, I can't, I think that there's an interesting comparison here between say Representative Rude and some of the comments he made earlier today, he's clearly a bipartisan thinker, and I'll give him credit for that. He shared the fact that he puts on a legislative karaoke and invites both parties, right? There's a lot to be said for bringing out the human elements of all of us. And you're right, being cognizant of our words carry power. And when we speak as elected officials or as parties, there are consequences to those words, and they have impact. I'd like to think that, look, I've been a business owner, a self-employed person for most of my career. I negotiate deals all the time, and that was even before real estate. I'd like to think that you look for win-win, right? I think sometimes we feel a bit victimized over here, right? We're the forgotten side of the state. But the other side has, they need us. The reality is they like coming to vacation here. They like our agricultural products. They like our sunshine. We were asked a question in the League of Women Voters last week about whether the East Side should join with Idaho, split, as you were talking, and it's preposterous, right? The reality is our two sides are different. We're unique, and yet we need one another. And I think it really is about being an ambassadorship, if you will, a stewardship of the East, and communicating to those in the West why we're important to them, why they need us, and why they should work with us. And I think that they're reasonable people. I've been really surprised, I guess you'd say, how many folks from the West Side have reached out, frankly, across party lines, and just given some words of encouragement and said that we can work through these issues together. So, but you're right, it's going to take a lot of humility. It's going to take some humbleness. And in some ways, maybe here on the East Side, we've got to kind of be bigger about it, in terms of understanding that we're not well understood by that side. So let's go in with humility and try to show our human side and bridge those gaps.
Okay, Representative Klicker, your turn.
Well, I kind of take that, Ken, a little personal when you brought that up. I mean, here's why. We went into the session. Number one, it was virtual, most of it. We reached out to Representative Fye to come down, invited him to come down, see our projects, work with him. I've worked with him on some other things within the session. We worked with Chairman Fitzgibbons on HB 1812. Asked to talk, work on the language, finding that, and then they turn on us without including us in the conversation. First time in history, and that we know of, on the transportation bill, that they did not include us. Now, how do you work back and forth when they don't even include us in discussion? How do you work back and forth when they say, sure, we'll work within the language. That's good language. We like it. They voted through the House and the governor vetoes it because it didn't. He vetoed it because they knew what was going on. We worked hard and reached out to them all the time. We have two representatives and a senator in Spokane. We have Marcus Riccelli and we have Tim Ormsby is in the House. And then we have Andy Billiggs, who is the Senate Majority Leader. And they didn't reach out as we tried to work with them on these issues. And they're Eastern Washington as well. We are doing as much as we can. Phase 7 of the project, we worked well. It was great. I mean, my predecessor helped work on that. Representative Rude, they hadn't made that decision. He is working on it, but he is upset. He is bothered that collaboration did not work. And so by saying, well, when are we going to wake up? I think we have worked on it and we hope to go back and do the same thing. But to say we're not working with them, we've reached out in a big way and really tried to find solutions and which have backfired on us.
I want to change the topic a little bit. I want to talk about public safety. I think that's a big concern for a lot of folks. Mr. Strickler, so what did you think about all the reforms that were made by the legislature? And then it seemed like they had to go back and tweak a lot of those. If you could elaborate on on your thoughts on what needs to happen next year.
Sure. So I think one of the points that I want to make is, so there's a couple of things I want to talk about regarding public safety. You know, as I understand it, there's a significant surplus in Benton County as it pertains to public safety and the taxes collected there. I think that it could be that the legislature needs to refine how those taxes can be used. Because, for example, I think to myself, if we could build a detox center, if we could do more in terms of mental health, what would that do in terms of helping our public safety officers? Could we better use those funds to, for example, to offset the sheer volume of overtime hours that our officers are putting in and provide them additional training. And in many ways, let's figure out ways to help our police officers better do their job, right? And some of that is listening to them. What do they need in terms of training and skills and staffing and so forth? And what parts of their role are we, in this country, so often when we don't have an answer, and particularly if it's politically contentious, drugs, homelessness, immigration, we say, hey, police, you deal with it, rather than looking at the root cause of why do we have this challenge and how do we resolve it without it just becoming a policing matter and being unfair, frankly, to those police officers that are out there risking their lives and doing their work. And I want to bring that then back around to this bill, okay? Because when I read the language in this bill, I think it's been misconstrued, okay? The pursuit bill specifically.
Oh,
So, I would never second guess our police professionals. They're the ones on the street doing the hard work for all of us to keep our community safe. If I'm going to trust them to make the right decisions. But as I read this bill, I almost see it as police friendly. And what I mean by that is the language says, if you're going to put yourself or the public in danger, then you don't have to pursue. And so, if our local law officers are choosing to not pursue because they think that's a danger to our public, then I'm going to back them to make the right decisions. But to say that the legislature is somehow mandating what the police are to do, that's just not what I read in the language. And as I say, I'm certainly, one of the things you'll note about me is how many public groups I've spoken to over the last few months. And I'm certainly open to a conversation with our local police throughout the region to better understand what they need and what they want in terms of legislation to support their efforts.
How about you, Mr. Klicker, Representative Klicker?
I have, first of all, if the legislature really wanted it, they would have passed a pursuit bill. We went clear to sine die up to the last minutes, and they refused to pass. Of all of the pursuit bills that were introduced, it was the weakest of all of them, but at least it was a pursuit bill, and it limited the officers to be able to do anything. But they refused again to put the bill for a vote. Why? We don't know why, because they weren't communicating with us why they wouldn't do it. And so we don't have until hopefully next session a pursuit bill. I have visited with almost all the police departments and worked with the police departments in the district the last 2 years. And it's been a joy to do it. Been able to tour their stations and work with them. At the same time, my son is a police officer, and the dangers he is up against every single day. He's pulling out fentanyl over all the other drugs. You don't find heroin anymore. You find fentanyl, and then you find some methamphetamine, because it's the upper, fentanyl's the downer. And it's just coming in droves. And so our crimes are skyrocketing. There's shootings, there's stabbings, there's everything. And the sad thing is it goes a little further. Our prosecuting laws or our judicial system is releasing these prisoners or these people that are arrested. The police officers are literally releasing these criminals and are arresting them. By the time they're done with their paperwork, they're back on the street and arresting those same people again the same day. It is out of control. They went too far on these police restraint bills. It really needs to change. We need to have tougher laws. They have temporary restraint where they can hold, people, but very careful, and that's okay. They got that done. We need a pursuit bill in the worst way, and identify exactly what Jeff was saying. We have to identify and have a way better mental health system, and we need to have rehab centers that don't just put people in there and have them to where they can go to rehab after 3 weeks to a month and then release them. They need to be able to make a decision. Am I going to voluntarily go into a rehab center, or we need to have a law where they volunteer, or they can be arrested and be incarcerated? They have a choice, and help these people with mental health funding. That's a great funding there, where we can fund mental health with more psychologists, psychiatrists, and educators, and help people get back on their feet, be able to have skill centers for them, and really concentrate on some of those things. And I'm looking at legislation to be able to have centers throughout the state to do just that.
Mike or Ken, did either of you have another question?
Yeah, I'd like to throw one in there. For Mr. Strickler, your website says that we need a voice who shares our values in Olympia. You're running as a Democrat, Representative Klicker is a Republican. That line would seem somewhat counterintuitive to many on this side of the state. Could you elaborate on what you mean?
Well, I don't know. Mark and I, at a forum last week, he said I sound like a Republican. So maybe I'm doing a good job. Actually, that same afternoon, somebody else said the same thing. So maybe I'm doing a good job of just being a moderate and speaking for the people of our region. If I'm a proud Democrat, a lifelong, and yet at the same time, I understand that partisan politics can be dirty. It can be counterproductive for all of us, right? I would really hope that the people of Eastern Washington, in a sense, can look beyond parties for either one of us and really look at the individual, look at what we're speaking about, and understand what the trade-offs are, the differences between the two of us, and what you believe that you'll get for your money, right? Because fundamentally, this is a job interview, right? We are paying somebody to go represent us, and again, all of these issues that I'm talking about, well. When I talk about values, for example, I would note that, the issues that I'm running on, when you look at my website or you look at my campaign materials that I've left on your doorsteps, I mean, these messages are coming from the people. They're not coming from me, right? And I think it's critical that when we run for elected office, my politics might be over here or over there, but fundamentally, you've got to represent the people in your region. And the people continue to tell me, it's about jobs, it's about housing, it's about healthcare, it's about childcare. And we've not hardly touched on any of those things in this conversation. And yet, when I'm knocking on those doors all across our district, these are the conversations that come up over and over and over again on people's porches and in their living rooms. And so in that regard, I would like to think that regardless of party affiliation, that I'm listening to what people are really talking about in their homes and that matter to them. And in that regard, I can take what people are talking about here, put aside in some ways my own personal beliefs and politics, and represent the people in a way that they want their message carried forward.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I did say that, but at the same time, my question is Mr. Strickler, is he would he really represent us in there? Because the values are so different between Eastern Washington values, Republican values, and what the majority of the people want and they want to see. And so, yes, he talks a good talk on that, and a person would have to see is that really what it is. But getting beyond that, I lived in this district all of my life. And we've been here for generations. I know the district. I know the people. I have friends and family throughout the whole district. I've done business all my life, and the family's there all my life. I haven't moved from Seattle or Portland or anything and come in and say, okay, I'm going to learn the district. I know it. And that is big because I understand, know the values of our people in business, in agriculture. I work back and forth with the different people in the blue collar people, and been out in Hanford the last couple weeks visiting with a number of the people, and would love to talk about energy as well, about what they want. And yeah, I'm talking to people about housing and building, and I've got a lot to say on that as well. And so I understand the district, I know it, I've lived in it, and I work really well with people in our district.
Well, let's talk about housing then. Mr. Strickler, you know that business really well, and you said that's one of the issues that you're hearing a lot about. So what are people saying, and how would you address their concerns?
So it's one of those things you don't fix with any single answer. It's complicated, right? And I know Mark and other Republicans throughout Eastern Washington are talking a lot about changing the Growth Management Act. Are there tweaks potentially that are needed? Possibly. But at the end of the day, it's protecting farmland just as it's designed to do. We're also seeing hundreds of new homes built in Burbank, in Benton City, in Prosser, in Walla Walla. It's not as though the GMA is blocking us from building houses, right? And I think we need to continue to do that. We also need to be cognizant of the impact on our resources, namely water, as we build out those houses, right? And infrastructure as well. We're talking about, do we need an interchange on Clinton Street here in Walla Walla, which is Highway 12, to support the new houses? So we've got to be cognizant of all of these things. At the same time, to my thinking, it's very clear. The problem with housing is jobs. And the Walla Walla Community Council's report on this was very clear. It essentially put to paper what I see as a realtor every day. We've essentially, throughout our region, we've got this bifurcation, if you will, between sort of what I'll call local folks and out of area folks. You know, if you've made your money elsewhere, then an $800,000 or $1 million home is normal, right? For those local folks, if you're making, the 60,000 or so a year median income throughout our region, then your buying power caps out at, maybe 350, 400,000. And yet we see house prices continue to go well through that. Rents continue to go well through that. So that's where my focus is so much on the economics of our region. We've got to help our local businesses. And I've used this example several times today. So pardon me if I'm a broken record, but I don't want a Foxconn situation like we saw in Wisconsin, right? Where you incentivize these outside businesses to come in, you throw them some tax incentives, and no jobs materialize, no revenues materialize. I want organic growth in our region, and I think the way we do that is in partnership with our colleges and universities, with our vocational schools. It's partnership with our unions to grow our apprenticeship programs. It's incentives for our businesses of all sizes. It's supporting the Port of Benton, the Port of Walla Walla, that are doing fantastic work, bringing in industry and supporting local industry. You solve that side of our equation, and housing, and frankly, a lot of these other issues that are related to it suddenly become a lot easier to solve, right? Your quality of schools is dependent upon your teachers and your administrators. But if those teachers and administrators can't find housing, that's the root cause, right? And that's part of why we're seeing declining enrollment in places like Prosser and Walla Walla. And it's tied to, if you can't, it's tied to your labor force and their access to housing. So we've got to focus on the job side of it. And then that will help us to solve these other issues. I say the same thing about healthcare. Why don't we have enough providers? Well, maybe we need to go back and incentivize, to help pay off their student loans, or put, other programs in place to get those doctors and nurses and so forth to come to rural America, come to small town America. All of these issues resolve around the economic choices that we make.
Okay. Representative Klicker, what's your take on jobs, housing?
Until you can lower the cost of products, until you can reduce regulation, lower regulation, until you can slim down the rules and regulation, your building costs are going to skyrocket, and we're seeing that. The cost of fuel. I'm a farmer. I raise timber. I am also a realtor. I do farm and ranch real estate, and I do some residential. And how I've watched this skyrocket, especially with our power issues, our fuel issues. For me to send off a logging truck full of logs, it costs me $500 per load. It used to cost about $200 a load. But the cost of fuel the cost of and regulation and the rules to log is difficult. So what does that do? Then it goes to the mill. The mill goes to the middleman. The middleman goes to the department store, or the hardware store, and they sell the product that has just absolutely skyrocketed in price. Then you also have regulation. Here's a perfect example. The State Building Code Council right now is considering some energy-related changes, and they're going to be mandates. And we have just a few days for opinions on what's going to happen. Then they make a decision, it'll go to the legislature, requiring and mandating all new homes to go in are required to put in a charging system into their house. It's not an option, they have to. They also have to, you will find in, with the GMA, trying to build a home, they need to change the way the GMA is done. The way they are forced to go into urban growth areas without being able to upside tax lots. They are forced now 8 years, used to be 5 years, downsize tax lots, meaning a tax lot could be an acre, but after every years they have to go in, a county commission and a planning council has to go in, make the changes, and most every time has to enlarge that tax lot. Pretty soon those tax lots go into noxious weeds, and there's no dust control, they can't water, they can't do anything, and then it makes it a real mess. The Growth Management Hearings Board, they're the ones that make the decision. And so that's why you're seeing in Spokane and outside in different areas of King County, that's the way it is with growth management. It gets difficult, and it's difficult to build. The regulations are overwhelming, and it will continue to cost more. We need to lower the regulations. We need to reduce costs. We need to get more energy. And a lot of that, and Jeff and I agree on that, was we need more energy. How do we get it? And we need to be able to lower our, we're going to be paying more tax coming up in January because they're going to increase with Climate Commitment Act, lots of, more taxes, and it's going to go up. I understand 50 cents to $1 per gallon starting in January, creeping up.
Okay, Ken, you had a question?
Yeah. You both talked more than a little about energy. And one thing I haven't heard either one of you say a word about is small modular nuclear reactors, which whichever of you get elected, if you haven't gotten your short course, you're sure to get that if you represent Tri-Cities. And, from what I hear and what I read, they have a lot of potential to add power where it's needed, not terribly expensively, that can be a long-term source. I'm wondering if both of you believe that we should be pursuing that, or, where you stand on that as becoming part of our power mix in the state of Washington.
I saw Mr. Strickler do a thumbs up right away. So we'll let him talk first, and then
I'll just be quick about this. So yeah, I think it's absolutely a conversation we need to have. And I'll take it one step further, which is say, I want to listen, because I'm not an energy expert. I'm a computer scientist by training. So I want to listen to the experts in this field who can, but one of the things that I'm really curious about is, I did a project with Portland General Electric about 10 years ago. And at that time, they were really talking about, well, in the future, we're going to be a storage entity, and all of the generation will actually be micro generation, probably at home. And so I really want to connect with more of our energy leaders here in Eastern Washington, better understand, how do you see your future? Do you see it in the generation? Do you see it in the storage? Do you see some combination? What does that mix look like? And I'm with you. I think that the small nuclear generator, I think this is fantastic technology. I think it's got great legs. I want to support, whether this makes sense for us in our region. I think my gut tells me that the future of energy is porque no los dos. It's like everything. It's probably going to still be hydro and nuclear and solar and wind. And the experts in our field are going to tell us what that looks like. I'm also really keen, frankly, to see how could we incentivize our business leaders to put more solar panels on roofs and on roofs of these large industrial warehouses that we have or in our homes, so that maybe we aren't cluttering up our valuable agricultural land. So I think that this is great technology all the way around. I want to learn more about it, and I think we've got a bright future here in Eastern Washington related to energy.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Klicker.
Well, Ken, hopefully your wish is my command, because I'm already working. I've got some nuclear energy bills coming our way, and I'm working diligently on that. I've got my policy people on that, and I've been working on that in the last year or so. I am very in tune because I've been working on nuclear energy for quite some time. In fact, people worry about, in most other places, they worry about the nuclear waste. The containment of nuclear waste isn't really a non-issue anymore. Over 38 years, we have had nuclear waste out at Hanford. That nuclear waste is stored in earthquake-proof, hurricane-proof, you name it. They can't be crushed in containers. And those containers of that 38 years of waste only makes up 1/3 of an acre. 2/3 of an acre, 0.7 of an acre. That's how much nuclear waste. That's it. And it produces incredible amount of energy. And so, yes, there's radiation out of it, but they explain to us out at Hanford how much radiation we're receiving from the sun, from just the vehicles we stand up against, solar panels, nuclear energy. We have it. 3 Mile Island. They showed that the nuclear radiation that came off that was nothing like they thought it would be after they did the testing. But the media took it and made it look horrible because they made nuclear energy for bombs or nuclear bombs. That is the facade that is out there. We got to change that. But yes, I have got some nuclear energy bills I think you're going to be excited about. I know because I've been working with some of the union people I've been working with and talk about new jobs. If that passes, and you got to understand, this is more of a federal issue at this point, but Washington State has to step up to the plate and open the hotel to them, wear the white hat and bring it. And you know what? We're going to get both sides of the aisle to agree. They're going to love it. In fact, the governor, he said he'd really consider nuclear energy if it replaces the hydroelectric dams, which I disagree with. But yeah, it sounds like he would be on board. So I'm pretty excited about it. Like I said, the last meeting, it's kind of in my wheelhouse, energy is. And so I love the conversation, but I'm doing something about it as we speak.
Okay, we are getting close to when we should wrap up, but we like to ask our candidates one last question, and that is, what did we not talk about that you wished we'd had? So if there was a question you'd wished we'd asked, a topic we hadn't covered, just let us know, and now's your moment. So do you think we did all right?
I would like to touch on a subject.
Sure.
I would hope that we have an environmental justice, even though it's not on our side of the state. It's actually the Puget Sound. The Puget Sound is really very, very toxic, and there needs to be some bills. It's literally a hazardous waste, Elliott Bay all the way through the Sound, and they really need to talk about that. And they have these environmental justice bills that they did in 2005, and the Puget Sound Partnership, and they've done nothing with it. They pass it as long as it can be regulated. They really need to get down and start talking about cleanup there. But then finally, this is scary, trying to take away our natural gas, and we're going to be relying on green energy. But if they're talking about removing our hydroelectric dams, which really scares me, and they do away with natural gas, folks, we're in trouble because our grid will not be able to handle it. And if they want us to do electric cars and all full electricity without natural gas or fossil fuels, we need to prepare. And so I really believe we put the cart before the horse.
Okay, great. What about you, Mr. Strickler? Anything we didn't cover that you want to mention?
I mean, I'd be happy to talk for another 2 hours. How much time do we have, right? So,
I don't have 2 hours, I'm afraid.
right. There's always another subject to talk about. I'll just comment this. I think, as we discovered, Mark and I were at a Rotary event earlier today, and we discovered that we maybe see elections and the security around our elections and the validity of our elections, which is part of a national conversation. It seems like we have some different opinions on that. I think we also have very different opinions, that have been publicly stated around women's rights, reproductive rights. So these are some points where we don't see eye to eye, and we are very different candidates in that regard. And I encourage the public to simply, research on their own our backgrounds and where we see things. Beyond that, I just want to comment that I see so much opportunity here in Eastern Washington. I mean, we just have boundless potential, and our people are hardworking and full of great ideas. I've commented on the trail that I don't think we realize sometimes how vast our region is. The 16th district in Benton County is like the size of Delaware. Walla Walla County is the size of Rhode Island. Our opportunity is as big as our landmass. And I thank you all for hosting this afternoon's event. And I'd encourage the public to go to electjeffstrickler.com and learn more about our campaign.
Great. All right. Just out of curiosity, I think I know which way you both go on the election integrity topic. Mark, do you have a hard stance on that? Did you want to go back to precinct, in-person voting, or
I
what's
would.
you would?
I
Okay.
personally would. I'm a traditionalist. I believe that, at least knowing how people in Eastern Washington work, we like, even if you have to travel 30, 40 miles to go vote and go to a precinct building or whatever, people like, at least I know a lot of the Republicans do, maybe not the Democrats, but they like to go and vote and put that vote in there and walk out and say, yeah, I voted. To me, it's a patriotic thing to do. I worry about ballot harvesting. I'm not saying that, the question was asked today, do you think that Biden won the election? He is certified, he's the president, I move on. It's not that the question was asked about Trump. The question was asked about George W. Bush back in 2000. It is what it is. We move on to another election. And so I am a believer that it would be nice to go back. And we started the mail-in ballots, and there's always been questions. The only questions I ever heard about going to a machine and pulling a lever was down in Florida back in 2000 when the chips. They weren't sure if they were read right, but otherwise you're always hearing. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle. You're always hearing about, were those mail-in ballots right? Are they hiding those ballots? Were they? It doesn't add up for either side. And so that's what I'd like to someday. It probably will never happen, and I'm not going to do legislation to do it this time. But it would be nice to see that again.
And Mr. Strickler, you said that you don't agree with that. So
I think we're a model for the rest of the nation. And I think that was proven by the fact that we had a Republican Secretary of State, and we've had a long line of, frankly, Republican Secretaries of State, in the state. And I think we've been successful, as well as Oregon has been, with mail-in voting for decades now. And I mean, as I say, the previous Secretary of State wouldn't have been taken up into a Democratic administration if there hadn't been if it hadn't been a good system, right? I mean, when you look at the long lines in other states and you look at real questions about voter repression, right, with essentially no analyzed examples of voter fraud, our model, I mean, it's so easy, right? Now, I will say, given how easy our system is, we don't even need a stamp anymore. I mean, I love this from the perspective of this should involve, they should get all of us out to vote, right? It's easy. And you know, I would hate to think that we'd have to make it a holiday to vote by mail. But you know, I'm open to suggestions about how do we get people of all ages, of all incomes, of all backgrounds, you know, excited about their participation in democracy, because as we know here in our area, every vote counts. It matters. And I think the election was, you know, absolutely valid this last go around. And I think our state, other states should look at Washington as a model of how do you, you know, make it easy for people to be involved in their democracy.
Okay, I just had to ask that. You brought it up and I was really curious. So thank you for humoring me. Okay, we really need to let you go. So I'm going to give Mr. Strickler a chance to do his closing, because Representative Klicker started last time, so we'll switch it this time. So whenever you're ready, you can just wrap up for me. Thanks.
Sure. I'll just comment by saying that I hope if you have questions out there, and as members of the public and you know, our hosts here, about my beliefs and what I think we're fighting for here, by all means reach out. I'd love to hear from you by phone, by email. Again, you can find us either on Facebook or at electjeffstrickler.com. You'll also see a long list of endorsers there. And if you're curious about who's stuck their neck out for me, who believes that I should go to Olympia, you'll find a whole lot of the people that speak to what I care about, which is education. It's about our workforce. It's about women's rights. It's about gun responsibility. So I'd encourage you to come to our website and see who else is willing to offer their support and endorsement for our campaign.
Thank you. Oh, my timer's just, what? I know you made it way under, so let me reset this for Representative Klicker. Okay, Representative Klicker, whenever you're ready. Oh, he's frozen.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
dear.
Well, I appreciate the mic froze up. Am I froze up? Am I froze up now?
Right now you're okay.
Am I okay there? Okay. I don't know why.
I know.
Right next to my router, so I don't know what's going on. I'm going to reiterate basically my closing statement is going to be my open statement. We have to reduce taxes, and you're going to be seeing a truckload of taxes coming in. That was voted in by the majority party at the state legislature and signed by the government. And if you want to continue to see more taxes, that's what you're going to see. Frivolous spending in areas that didn't work for anybody but the Puget Sound area. You might start seeing new bills coming in to get rid of natural gas. That's scary. And I don't see any support when it comes to the support of our hydroelectric dams. So the ideology in Eastern Washington, 16th legislative district, I believe, falls right in line with my ideology. And that's where I believe I will represent them very well. What I am excited about is the new nuclear energy bills I'm going to have. We want to put people to work and open those doors to the federal government to come in and help us on that. At the same time, I want to be able to see new jobs, but we do have to have, like I said, like we were talking before, Columbia Basin Community College skill center jobs, Wawa Community College skill center jobs, and focus more on that so people can go to work. And I know the unions are looking forward to that. I've had some great conversations and they want to see it. So those are the things we need to work on, and I look forward to serving another 2 years. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very, very much. This is very insightful. Wonderful conversation. I appreciate your participation today. So, all right, I'm going to stop recording. So
Thank you.
take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.